Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I talk about travel tips. We talk to Spencer Tassone about heat waves, researching, and shiny apps. And finally, the island of Kauai is the wettest spot on the earth. Each year, Oh, you did it to me this time. Mount Wailie gets an average of 450 inches of rain. This happens for a couple of reasons. First, the mountainous edges are steep and the volcanic shield catches a lot of condensation from the trade winds that are coming through. And second, the mountains have a round shape that leaves it exposed to rain and wind. So there you go.
I can't imagine why I picked that one for you to read. It's so...
Yeah, so how do you say it for real?
Well, yeah, no, I don't even know. Why a lot?
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a dirty trick.
Yes, of course.
Hit that music.
NAEP South Carolina is happy to announce its next Lunch and Learn on August 4th, 2023 at 11:45 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And it will cover Army Corps regulatory updates. Army Corps' Jeremy Kinney will be discussing what's new in the Charleston District's regulatory program. He will be speaking about regulatory and district updates, waters of the United States, and the stream flow duration assessment methods. Lunch will be provided. There is no virtual option for the event. Attendees must register by Friday, July 28th, 2023.
We do not have a sponsor for this episode currently, so let's hear your funny 30-second sponsor made-up thingy. Go.
Okay, all of us wish that we could smell like a wetland at all times, right? We all wish we could smell like that. And I have a product for you today. It's called Mud Love. That's right, Mud, L-U-V, Mud Love. So all you do is stand still, and this will blast muck right at your face, and you will become a wetland. And we have multiple different options. You don't have to just say, "Oh, what if I want to smell like a salt marsh? What if I want to smell like the Florida Everglades?" Right? We have many different tiers, many different options for you. It's great. It's wonderful. Exfoliates the skin. Does all these wonderful benefits. Makes you a true swamp creature. And just like the predator, you can also hide from, like a you can hide from things they're trying to see you through with thermal energy. We're 100% sure that works. Definitely. This has been, we'll say FDA pending approval, but I'm telling you, Mud Love. That's it.
I'm pretty sure you might have gone over 30 seconds, but when you said predator, I stopped counting.
If it bleeds, we can kill it. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
I kind of feel like if this was like a candle series, environmental professionals might actually buy it.
Oh, you know what? Yeah. Yeah, that'd be really funny. Oh my gosh. Salt marsh.
Let's get to our segment.
I actually just gave a speech yesterday to the junior staff, the two newest people we hired. About
what kind of speech did you give them?
Prepared travel, how to just tips for traveling. What
did you tell them?
We've talked about this a little bit, but the number one is to have a backup set of nice clothes in your carry-on. If you're checking a bag, that bag could get lost, and then you could show up to a meeting in spandex and a jean jacket. And I'm not saying I did, but that's happened before, and you don't want to do it. It's a tough, it's a tough thing to show up to a meeting, and you're like, well, I got my my baseball T-shirt from when I was 8, and so that's the number one for me is have a backup set of nice clothes, so that you can and also if you're going there, you can still wear nice clothes to the destination as well. So then you have two if you need them. But there's always small things like that. It's cold on a plane, so you'll need long sleeves. It's always a good idea. And I know you've got tips. I don't want to just ramble on. See, I'm stopping myself. I'm editing. This is like a breakthrough for me. So
I want to know what you're telling your actual staff, because there may be other people listening who their bosses aren't giving them this information.
Well, I mean, the other thing, because we're talking about going into the field for the first time too. So we had a conversation about, cotton, and cotton kills in the East Coast, especially. It does not breathe. And if you're wearing cotton, it'll bog you down, So you have to wear those light fitting, lightweight, quick dry clothes. Like I say, especially when it's humid, because it's just not going to help you.
Right.
But, on that token too, if you're at a business meeting and you're going to be outside and you have to wear sort of nice clothes, you definitely need an undershirt. On the East Coast, anywhere it's humid, you need an undershirt. Otherwise, it's just going to show up on your shirt, you know? So there's stuff like that, you know, proper boot wear, understanding what you're going to be doing and where, all that stuff.
Shoes is always a hard thing for me to pack because they take up so much space.
Yeah.
You know, and no matter where I go, I end up with like 3 pairs of shoes.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, you know, like you need a good pair of waterproof boots. That's almost like essential for working outside. You know, if you have muck boots, that's great, but those are super hard to pack because they're huge.
Yeah.
If you're doing wetland work though, you kind of need them. Like you kind of need them. You can get by with waterproof boots, which is what I usually do actually. But like, you know, all it takes is one bad step and there goes your shoe, you know, and you're like, damn it, you know. But yeah, that's the basic stuff. You know, there's other stuff too, but I'm sure you've got other ideas or thoughts about travel. Oh
yeah. Well, you know, I just went to Paris for 2 weeks and didn't want to bring anything but a carry-on. And I actually brought one carry-on, and actually it's not even a carry-on. It fits under the seat if needed. And, yeah, the
Extreme Travel by Laura Thorne.
Well, and I did have 3 pairs of shoes in there. They weren't hiking boots, but if I needed those, I would have worn them on the plane. So, you know, I think when I do need to bring boots, they're what I wear on the plane, right? And then the smaller shoes get packed. But yeah, it's always good to have. I think you have to consider what you can check and what you can't check, because if you know that you have time, or like, let's say you're going somewhere for a week, but you're not presenting until 4 days after you get there, you're pretty safe to check things. Because even if it gets lost, you probably get it. I'm not going to say all the time, but, or you have time to go shopping, right? And then,
exactly.
But if you're presenting the same day or the next day, you don't want to put that stuff in the check-in. Little safer on a direct flight. So there's a lot of like things to consider about, you know, your destination, how many flight changes you have, that kind of thing. But yeah, I try to generally pack light. There are times when I just bring my rolly bag because I know I'm just going from point A to point B, and it's much more convenient to just check it. So I've gotten very big into just checking things. But for Paris, I knew that we were going to spending a whole day in New York City on the way, and we're going to walk around New York City. I wasn't going to bring a rolly bag with me. And also just like, it was a rare trip that wasn't for work at all. So it's just kind of like, I'm going to be in shorts or jeans all the time. Yeah. We had one nice pair of clothes for a ridiculously nice, expensive restaurant that we went to. It was a 3-hour, like 7 course. It was crazy. It was so good.
Yeah, that's a different.
An old train station. It was awesome. It was really good.
It better be. If it's 3 hours long, it better be good. You know, can you imagine if it's not? It's just like, man, this is 3 hours long and it's horrible.
Right. No, I mean, for me, I write down all the dates and what things I have on those days. So then I'm like, okay, this day I need nice clothes. This day I need work shoes. This day I need flip flops, you know, so then I kind of have an idea of everything that I need. And then I base like, if I'm just bringing the carry on or my personal item, or if I'm doing the check-in, you know, based on that. And then 5 or 6 days of clothes and plan to do laundry at that point is it.
So funny. Yeah. And I would never want to do laundry on a trip, but you have to sometimes. You have to.
Yeah. It's just, I don't mind. Sometimes, like in Paris, you know, we're at the local laundry and that's where real local people are. So we stopped at the bakery, grabbed some croissants and hot chocolate, and sat in the laundromat and watched real folks do their laundry, you know?
Yeah. Real folks. I know what you mean, but yeah, that's very fun. Oh, that's very cool. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are some pretty good tips. I mean, I think the last thing for me would be, if you are checking a bag, don't put anything in there you don't want to lose. Just assume that it could get lost. So what is it? There was a bunch of United flights that got canceled for lots of different reasons in the news recently. And like, there was a leadership summit that we had for us, for our company. And like everyone in the Northeast, their flights were canceled. So they couldn't.
Oh, no.
All of their bags ended up in Denver. So my boss's boss, like the person running the environmentalist, is like, I never put anything in my carry-on or my check bag that I don't, like I could live without. But for some reason, I put my straightener there. She's like, I put my straightener in my check bag and it's gone. So she's like, she went and she's like, I have to buy another one. Like it's not the same, you know, like she got a cheaper version or something, but like, she's like, I needed a Gap straightener, you know, until she gets her bag back.
Yeah.
I think it took like a week and a half. It took a long time to get their bags back. So Yeah.
At least that we live in a world where you could get it back, you know?
Yeah, that's true. They knew where it was. It's just sitting there in Denver, like with everyone else's bag.
Yeah. Another, pro tip is the AirTags. If you can get an Apple AirTag kind of thing, you can have them a little more security of knowing, because the airlines don't always give you the right answer. Delta has really good tracking on their stuff. It'll tell you where your bag is and it'll tell you got on the plane and your bag went over here.
Yes. Yep. Your bag arrived. Yeah.
Yeah. It is nice to have the AirTag in there just to go, okay, it landed too,
Yeah.
Not that it changes anything, but if the airline isn't sure, you can be like, I can see that it is not here.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
But our guest is a big traveler, and we really didn't get to talk to him too much about this during the interview, but I would love to maybe in the future bring him back on and talk about his travel.
Yeah, for sure.
Planning. But yeah, let's get to it.
Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Spencer Tassone, a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Biological Sciences at Michigan Tech University on the show. Welcome, Spencer.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah. So, you worked at VCU right when I left. So we crossed paths in a way, and we know people that you know. And then somehow I ended up working with your wife, and here we are talking on the show. How have things been? How are you doing?
Things have been going well. Recently defended my dissertation back in April. So newly minted PhD and
congratulations.
Found work pretty quickly. So happy to be where I am.
That's awesome. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your research while we're here? Like, what did you do your dissertation on?
Sure. So my dissertation work was at University of Virginia in the Department of Environmental Sciences. For my research, I studied heat waves. I'm sure most people have heard of heat waves and have experienced heat waves in their day-to-day life, but I studied heat waves in water. So, heat waves can happen in the atmosphere, and that heat can get transferred into water. And most of the work that's been done on heat waves in water have been done at very large geographic scales like the ocean. But there's been far less work done on coastal systems and even further inland in like streams and rivers.
Right.
So for my dissertation work, I had, 4 research chapters. One of them was the first to assess heat waves in rivers. And I did this for 70 rivers throughout the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's an undertaking.
Yeah.
And then for my second chapter, I studied heat waves in estuaries throughout the U.S. So, we had estuaries, which just for the listener, an estuary is a tidal body of water. So, typically salinities can vary between totally freshwater and totally salt water, or some mixture of those two. So yeah, I studied heat waves and estuaries throughout the U.S. and sort of how those heat waves can impact other water quality variables like oxygen and pH. For my third chapter, I studied how heat gets transferred from the water into sediments. Mm-hmm. And I did this in a coastal area. So those first 3 chapters were working sort of from inland to sort of coastal and then offshore. And then for the last chapter, it was a little bit random, but I studied how seagrass ecosystems recover after a disturbance event like a heat wave. Seagrass are sensitive to temperature and heat waves have induced mass mortality events. So mass mortality events of seagrass. Right. And so my work looked at, after a disturbance event happens, how long does it take for the system to recover? So those 4 research chapters made up my dissertation.
Oh man, I have so many questions about the whole thing. I want to start actually with the data though. Like that's got to be a couple of things. Like it's how do you get data for 70 rivers? That seems like it would take, forever. And then how do you actually measure it? Like what are you measuring?
Yeah, so those are good questions. So, for the type of data that you need in order to do heat wave analysis, you typically need very long-term data. So typically on the order of 20 to 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And you need daily mean water temperature. So, you have daily mean water temperature for the past, say, 30 years for 70 sites. And that data, at least for, if we think about rivers, is generated by many different federal and state agencies. And so the data that I used came from the United States Geological Survey. They have a national water inventory system where they do a lot of different type of water quality monitoring throughout the US. And some of that includes collecting long-term water temperature measurements.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that explains it. That's as I say. Yeah, I don't want to assume your age, but I was like, if you started when you were 2, quite impressive. So no, well, that's really cool. And like, I also love and we could dive more into what you're doing now in a minute, but like, I love the journey you took to get to where you are. So like, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Like, how did you get to UVA? I know it's kind of a unique story.
Yeah. So my path to UVA and to where I am as a postdoc now is a little unique relative to, I feel like, most people that I've met in this sort of academic trajectory that I'm on. So I was a really lazy or unmotivated high school student and wasn't interested in pursuing higher education, when I graduated high school. I went to work right after graduating high school and quickly found out that making minimum wage wasn't a path for the future.
Right.
And so I started taking classes at a community college. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and the local community college there is Tidewater Community College. And I started taking classes there, started getting somewhat interested in the academic world. But, I was still working. I started picking up work working at a plant nursery. And that really sparked my interest in, how do plants function? What do they need to survive? But, that was just an interest. I didn't see that as something that you could make a career of. And so after I finished my associate's degree, my intentions were actually to join the military. And, I went to the military recruiter, I was going through that whole process. And then, some ways down the line, I found out that I was actually not qualified according to their rules to join the military. So that was a bit of a gut punch. That was not something that I had anticipated, and I didn't really have a plan B.
Right. Yeah.
But, doing some soul searching, I finally decided that maybe I'll pursue my interests in plants. And, I did really enjoy, growing up in Virginia Beach. I was, always at the beach and on the water. And so I had these two interests in, plants and being on the water. And I thought, maybe I'll go and pursue this bachelor's degree. And at the time, and I think this is still currently going on, if you get an associate's degree and you maintain a certain GPA, you're guaranteed acceptance into some Virginia schools. And I already had friends in Richmond going to VCU. And I said, that sounds like a great fit. Let me go check out their environmental program. I really liked what I saw. And so I transferred to Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond and started studying environmental science.
Yeah. Go Rams.
Yeah, go Rams. When I transferred there, I was fortunate enough to meet a graduate student who was a teaching assistant for one of the classes I was taking. And we were tasked with writing like a research proposal, just like a 1-paragraph thing. And, I had so many different interests. And I went and talked to this, graduate student, and they started telling me about their own research, which was a combination of my interests in studying plants and being on the water that I hadn't considered yet, which was studying algae. Algae is an aquatic plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that graduate student, his name's Joe Wood. He works for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation currently. In his research, he allowed me to start working with him. And I basically joined this lab that was run by Paul Bukovics.
Yeah.
And I basically didn't leave for like 7 years. I completed my bachelor's degree. I was really interested in the research that was going on in the lab. So I stayed and worked on my master's degree, finished that. And then as I was finishing my master's degree, Paul got money to kick off a new research project that required a research assistant, a full-time research assistant. So I was able to land that job. And so I worked as a research assistant for a couple of years. This whole time I'm, publishing or co-authoring papers, academic, scientific papers. And eventually, after 2 years of working as a research assistant, I was able to get into the PhD program in environmental sciences at UVA. And I was there until April of this year.
There we go.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
That's a little long-winded, but yeah, it's okay. It's a little different from, a lot of the people that I met along the way who sort of knew exactly what they were going to do in high school, and maybe went to a really good high school, and then went to, some really nice undergraduate program, to then going into a PhD program and getting their PhDs when they're like 26.
Right.
So I took a little bit more of a windy route to get to where I am now.
No, that's great. I think it's great for people to hear that, because you're not the only one. There's other people who are getting to a point where they're doubting whether they can start now, wherever they're at, or if it's too late or whatever. And I think it's really good to hear all those details. But now you're working on several different projects, which we can get into in a minute. But even the projects you're talking about, I've always wondered this myself, because I didn't do any research in college. I participated in other people's research, but I never sat around a table and planned out a research project. So where do these ideas come from? Is there a roadmap the college has that they want, or are you dependent on your academic advisors, or you just go, hey, I have this interest, and you just do it?
So it's a combination of all of those things you mentioned. What was a real game changer for me was that, when I was an undergrad, it's a bit of an open secret that you can get paid to go to graduate school and not have to incur any, not have to pay tuition, not have to incur any more debt. And that was a game changer for me. So, basically you get paid to teach classes while you're working on your master's or your PhD. And I should probably couch all this in saying that this, from what I understand, is commonplace in the natural sciences and not so commonplace in the humanities or, other non-natural sciences, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think is the way people talk about it.
Yeah.
And there are programs out there that are more professional based. They're not necessarily you can work on a professional graduate degree, not necessarily an academic professional degree or an academic graduate degree. And typically with those professional degrees, you wind up paying out of pocket. But if you're working on an academic graduate degree, you really shouldn't be paying for it.
Okay, that's a good distinction.
That's all to say. That doesn't really answer the question that you had asked. So let me get back to that. Yeah. So when I was, starting to do research as an undergraduate, I was helping out on research projects of graduate students that either developed the idea themselves or in collaboration with their, graduate school advisor, or sometimes graduate school advisors, they write grants to do certain projects, and those projects get dropped on graduate students. So there's different routes. So you can develop your own research projects. I did that for my PhD work, but, I also had a project that needed to get done that was given to me. So it's getting back to your question, how does it get developed? It's a mash of several different ways that sort of drive your research, especially, when you're starting out.
Okay. So maybe if you have an idea, it's worth shopping around or putting it out there and asking some people if you could do it, or how to build it into something you could do.
Yeah, for sure. And, another good place this is what I always do. Sometimes when I have research ideas, there's probably somebody else who's already done that project or something very similar.
Right.
So
right.
Going to look through, what papers have been published on a specific topic is a good place to start if you have a research project you're interested in. And I'll give an example real quick. So, I was very interested in riverine heat waves. I knew that there was work being done on heat waves in the ocean. And I knew that there was a lot of work being done on increasing water temperature trends in rivers. But when I went to go look for heat waves in rivers, any work on that, I found that there were no papers on it.
Yeah.
And so that's when I was like, okay, I have something here. So,
cool.
That's how something like that comes about.
Yeah. That's a great example. That's good to share. And then how many projects are you now? So how long have you been with Michigan Tech now?
So I've been with Michigan Tech for the past 3 months. I started in May 2023 and here we are in July.
Yeah.
I'm just getting some projects going there that are very interesting. Looking at long-term changes in, stream and lake water quality in places that are fairly remote that haven't had much human disturbance.
Okay. And I imagine now you'll be working on projects where students will come and assist you.
Yeah. I'm always interested in having students come and help out on projects. That was a big help to me when I was coming up. So I'd like to be able to do the same, now that I'm in this, I guess, more senior position. But yeah, I work remotely, and remotely mentoring students and connecting with students is somewhat challenging. So I am going up to Michigan Tech, next week to visit, and I hope to connect with some of the students that are in the lab that I'm working with to see if, we can start thinking of projects to work on together.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. And and you have this history of all the stuff that you've worked on. You have all the stuff that you're going to be working on, and some of your research. So I'm looking through your bio, and the thing that made my eyes light up, and I'm such a policy nerd, I can't help myself. But you say that some of what you've done has helped shape public policy. So what was that? What was the research and how did it influence policy?
Yeah, for sure. So, during my dissertation, I was working on riverine heat waves and I published a paper on it. And it just so happened to be that the Chesapeake Bay Program had assembled a science and technical advisory committee to look at how increasing temperatures in Chesapeake Bay and in the watershed of Chesapeake Bay are going to impact the ecology and what sort of management responses can be taken to address these rising temperatures. And so, it was just a convenient timing of the work that I was doing and this sort of outside group that was interested in similar things. So I got invited to participate on the Science Technical Advisory Committee, and we wrote a report on the ecological implications of rising water temperatures. Mm-hmm. And that technical report came out January of 2023. And it's a report that gets used to guide policy.
That's very cool. I think I read that without realizing it was you. So that's cool. That's very, very cool. That's awesome. And so, okay, cool. That's great. So Spencer, we cross paths in the night here. That's our whole thing. Yeah. Cause gosh, I think you and I left when you got there at VCU. And I was there the year before you, and you were there the year after. That's pretty funny. But yeah.
I moved to Richmond in 2012, and that's when I started at VCU.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. Yeah. So gosh, that's such a wild thing. But anyway, yeah, let's just talk about how cool we are. That's the whole interview.
Right. You guys continue this bromance offline.
Yeah, right.
Back to the interview now.
I know. So you've done a lot of research on rivers and heatwaves and all that, and and how they kind of negatively impact the relationship between rivers' natural ability to sequester carbon and the amount of carbon they produce. So let's dive into that. Why does that happen? What's going on when we have heat waves in rivers, and what can we do about it?
Yeah. So this is such a new area of research. There really hasn't been much work done on riverine heat waves. But from what we know about what happens in the marine environment when we have heat waves, that there's all these negative impacts. They can stress out the organisms that live there. Organisms, including humans, have a thermal tolerance that we can accept. And when we start to exceed those, we get stressed out. And if we exceed that temperature stress threshold for long enough, that can lead to mortality. So in marine systems, there have been places like seagrass that have died because of marine heat wave. There's places where kelp has been, where there used to be kelp forests, a heat wave rolls through, it kills the kelp, and then the system doesn't recover back to a kelp forest. It becomes something else.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of ecological implications for heat waves because so many things are temperature dependent. So many biochemical reactions are temperature dependent. So, for example, like in forests, they produce oxygen and consume CO2, and so do rivers, right? So rivers have algae in them. The algae produce oxygen and they consume CO2. But the difference is that rivers receive a lot of organic matter from the watershed. So that organic matter eventually breaks down. That sort of breakdown of organic matter consumes oxygen and releases CO2. And so rivers tend to produce more CO2 than they consume. And that whole process of organic matter breakdown is strongly temperature dependent. And so if you start to have these heat waves, there's the potential that that rivers will become stronger producers of CO2. That's some work that I've been dabbling in with collaborators at Michigan Tech. This is a project that we have some preliminary results for that sort of confirmed this hypothesis that I just laid out, but is a project that we're still working on and is very exciting to me, but it's not good thing for the environment.
Right. Yeah, it's not good news. Yeah, but it's very, very fascinating, very interesting. And I think, diving into other parts of what you're talking about, I think that's one of the most fascinating parts about research, right? You're learning about warmer waters negatively impacting fish, but also learning that reducing tree coverage through wildfires can also hasten this effect. So these are all super connected. And like I say, it's not good news. So how significant of a problem is it? And is there something we can do about it?
For sure. Yeah. So heat waves have been a process that they naturally occur. There's a sort of a normal distribution of temperature. And, on one end, at either end of that distribution, you have extremes. And so we always have had heat waves. However, these heat waves are becoming more and more frequent as time goes on. And they're also tending to last longer as time goes on. So we're sort of shifting this distribution of water temperature to a warmer place that, has all sorts of implications for not only the organisms that live in these systems, but also for the systems themselves. These ecosystems are undergoing change because of these short, discrete, extreme temperature events. And these short, discrete temperature events tend to have a disproportionate effect relative to like a long-term change in like a mean temperature.
Right. Oh, that's wild. Yeah.
I'm just picturing turning on the tap on a hot day and the water coming out warm. It just makes me sad.
Yeah.
When you're like, cool water. This is great.
Yeah. And from, an infrastructure perspective, these heat waves have, an impact on drinking water, for example. There's been some work showing that heat waves can increase the frequency of harmful algal blooms. And, if you're an environmental professional whose job it is to make sure that drinking water is of high quality, you may start to be worried about these heat waves because of their impact on harmful algal blooms. There's also, nuclear power plants. They use river water temperature to cool their systems down. And if that water is becoming hotter more frequently, that has the potential to have an impact on, our energy production. So it's not only interesting, and from my perspective, it's not only interesting from an environmental view, but it's also interesting from a more infrastructure view.
Right, absolutely. So as much as Nic is a policy nerd, I am a data and tech nerd. So I'm super interested in an app that an app that you are working on for this. So what is the app going to do?
Sure. So I have a couple of apps that I'm working on. I've recently got into, trying to make the data that I work with and the results that I produce more accessible to folks. It's one thing to write papers and publish those, but most of that work gets viewed by other sort of academics and scientists and policy folks. But getting back to your question, one of the apps that I'm working on that I'm pretty excited about is I've done some work with another postdoc friend of mine at VCU. His name's Joe Marina. And we're both interested in heat waves, and Joe's more interested in atmospheric heat waves. And so what we've done is we've pulled down all of the daily mean atmospheric temperature measurements for every county in North America.
Oh.
And we've done this for the past 30 years. The data comes from, it's a NASA product that was developed in collaboration with Oak Ridge National Laboratory. It's called DayMet. There's an R package for it if anyone's familiar with R in our studio.
R. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Yeah, of course.
And so what we did is, we got the center point of every county in North America, which is there's something like 6,000 counties. And I call them counties, but they're really county equivalents. Right. They call them different things in Canada, and they call them different things depending on what state you're in the US.
Like Virginia, for example, or we have counties and cities and they're separate, which is super weird.
Yeah. And we have independent cities. Yeah. So we pulled down all of this data. We put it through this heat wave analysis. And so we have different heat wave metrics for each county, again, in North America. And so this app that I'm working on will allow a user to access that data and to be able to visualize it. So you would be able to sort by country, then sort by state or state equivalent, and then sort by county equivalent, to be able to really zoom in on your location and find out more about atmospheric heat waves and trends in atmospheric heat waves for where you live. And we decided to do this because working at the county level, we feel like is the place where policy can really hit the road, where things start to happen. And so we came at it from this policy perspective, thinking that if we do this, at the county level, that's where it could potentially have the most impact. And so the current status of this project is we've done most of the analyses. There's a couple of other small things we want to do, but we're starting to work on the app itself. And we're hoping that sometime later this year, maybe early next year, to publish a paper that basically provides the output of the data set as well as the user-facing app so that people can find out what's going on in their county as well as download that data too.
That's great. I feel like the apps are going to be coming out more frequently and more popularly. Like you said, people aren't reading academic papers unless they are forced to, or they just super enjoy it, which is a small part of the population, I believe. And so I think apps, and plus, you have the integration and engagement with people. It's not always just like pulling the information out like a website. An app is usually something you can integrate with. And so I'm curious about how you're building it, because there may be other people out there thinking like, I need to do this too. Is that an in-house project, or are you paying someone to actually build it with you? Are you learning this stuff yourself?
Yeah, so we're doing this stuff ourselves. And the way that the app is built, so taking a step back, so all of the data that I work with, I do most of that work in RStudio. RStudio is just an open source software that you can code in to produce graphics and, do data wrangling, and, you can download data, and you can also produce these apps. They're called Shiny apps, and they're free to, develop, and makes it easy to collaborate with other people. Yeah. So I've recently been sort of teaching myself how these Shiny apps work. I've developed an app for, some of the postdoc work I'm working on. And, it's something that I've recently gotten into, and it can be challenging to learn how to do this stuff. But what's been very helpful with learning how to get these apps off the ground has actually been ChatGPT.
No way.
Yeah.
Yes.
ChatGPT can code, and it can produce code for you. And so the approach that I take is that I make an example data set, just fake data, but it has a similar structure to the data that I'm working with. And I'll give that to ChatGPT, and I'll say, hey, write me a Shiny app that does, X, Y, and Z, and it will produce code for you. And you can then modify that code to make it work with the actual data set that you're working with. And so it's been very helpful with getting those it's been very helpful with shortening the learning curve for things like Shiny apps.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
You still need to have some knowledge. You can't modify it if you don't know what the code looks like or what it's telling you. But
exactly,
from point A to point B is very helpful that way. So very cool.
That's very cool.
And so how do you envision the users using the app?
Yeah, so I envision it being on a website, be it, either my personal website, or we would develop a website for the app. And basically a person can hopefully Google atmospheric heat waves and their location, and our website will come up. Basically, there will be options like drop-down menus for the user to work through to get to their, county, or they could type in their county name and click on that option. And then, there will be a map that zooms into that location. And it'll be like a chloropleth map that, colors change depending on the values. And there will also be a little button to download the data. That's one vision of it. There's another vision of it where, you can zoom in on basically different time points. Like say you're interested in what's been going on in the past 5 years. So you'd be able to sort of drag the time series to zoom in on specific events or specific years, and also be able to download the data that way.
Nice.
Yeah. So these Shiny apps, what's great about them is that, there's a lot of things great about them, but you can interact with them and they automatically change based on user inputs.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And we're getting close to the end of time here, but before we do, I see we have a segment on our show called Field Notes where we talk about like our guests' memorable experiences in the field. I know you've had plenty of time in that field. So, but I don't think we've honestly had a shark story yet. I don't think we have. We've been doing this show for a long time and I don't think we've had one. So tell us your shark story.
Yeah. So, I had mentioned sort of the chapters of my dissertation earlier, and one of the chapters was working on seagrass, and I worked at a place called the Virginia Coast Reserve. The Virginia Coast Reserve makes up basically the mainland side of the Delmarva Peninsula, all the way out to the barrier islands that are offshore. That whole region in between is Virginia Coast Reserve. And so I was working about 6 miles offshore behind a barrier island called Wreck Island. And behind Wreck Island is a seagrass meadow that's been restored. The system had actually lost all of its seagrass back in the early 30s because of a slime mold disease, and a hurricane came through and it wiped it all out. But people at UVA and at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science started reseeding that area, and the seagrass grew back. And now there's this lush, large seagrass meadow behind Wreck Island. Anyways, I was doing work out there. I was collecting the data I needed for my dissertation, and I had to work at low tide to be able to access my sites. Anyways, on this particular day, low tide was in the afternoon. The sun started going down, and out of nowhere, I start hearing splashing. Mm-hmm. And I look up and I see a fin, and this fin is maybe 50 feet from me.
Right.
And what that fin was attached to appeared to be pretty large. And so I was like, let me get out of the water. We have a boat nearby that's maybe, 10 feet from me. So I got out of the water. I put my drone up in the air and was able to see that one fin, that there was actually 4 or 5 different fins. And it turned out to be that they appeared to be sharks. And they appeared to be, on the size of like 4 to 6 feet long. And it looked like they were all feeding along the margin of the seagrass meadow, which was, again, like maybe 50 feet from where I was. And, I was working with other people, and we all, rushed out of the water. It was scary. It was thrilling. And needless to say, we we finished our sampling then. We weren't getting back out in the water.
That's probably a wise decision. It's probably safe.
Yeah.
It's a good time to draw straws.
Yeah.
Right. You go get it. Yeah.
Yeah. That was it for that day. And, I got some pretty cool drone pictures of it.
Oh,
and, upon closer inspection, they may have not been sharks. They may have been some just other large fish that lives in the ocean. I'm not a fish. I don't claim to be a fish guy. But some folks are like, oh, maybe those are just big tarpon or something. It was hard to say. But in the moment, we thought they were sharks. And I mean, they were big fish. So
yeah, it's the size of a person, 6 feet.
Yeah.
It's so funny when you say, it's 4 to 6 feet. That's a small shark or a medium-sized shark. It's a huge fish. It's a monster.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, I'm not the only person that has worked out there there were several shark sightings, and there's video of sharks at our sites where we do our work. And
there's bull sharks.
It's not, it's not uncommon to see sharks out there. So,
yeah.
It's not like he's standing around waiting. Well, I'm not sure. Let's just hang out and wait and see if this is a tarpon.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah, they'll go away. We'll get back in the water and
this is
that's not happening.
Yeah. Thinking your life doesn't flash before your eyes or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're out there and you have your head underwater and you hear splashing and it puts your head on a swivel. It definitely and most of the time it's not a shark. It could be like a seagull just like going into the water to get a fish or something, or maybe some small waves crashing. It's usually not something scary, but it's hard when you're that far offshore. It's hard to not think of those things.
Oh heck yeah! As I say,
my favorite in all my time doing seagrass was being in dark water and feeling something brush your leg.
Oh yeah, that is awful.
And there's a ton of stingrays and stuff out there too. You have to do something called the stingray shuffle so that you don't startle one and it gets you, like, sticks you.
Oh yeah, gosh. And but like I remember being like snorkeling and like you have a sense of awareness. I think if you're in the field more than other folks. So when you see all the fish just like hanging out and then dive and disappear, and you're like, why is that happening? And you turn around, and it's for me it was just a blue-footed booby trying to diving in and eating it. But like at the time, the first thought is I better make sure I should still be here. That's so crazy. I love that. It's working in the field. That's what happens.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be scary, but most of the time it's very pleasant. Very, if you're working in a seagrass meadow 6 miles offshore, it can be very beautiful out there. So.
Yeah. And like you said, even if it is a shark, that's cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I just don't want to be in the water with it.
Golly. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I had snorkeling again, I see a 3-foot shark. So it's just a small black tip reef and it swims right underneath me. And, it's this little guy. He's not bothering me. The person next to me sees it and freaks out and, kicks me right in the face, and I'm like, afterwards, like, hey guy, that's a 3-foot shark. That thing isn't doing anything to either one of us. Please don't hit me. But people are scared of sharks. Like I totally get it. And it was, and I'm not probably exaggerating. It was probably a 2-foot shark, but in my head it's 3 feet long. But you know what I mean?
Underwater things look bigger.
Yes, that's what we'll say. Please don't kick me. That's really all I care about.
All right. Well, this has been super fun talking about all your great projects and things, and would love to talk about more. Is there anything though that you're just dying to talk about that we did not get to?
I mean, I have so many projects that I have passions for, and I could go on and on about them. But I would say if folks are interested in my research, to check out my website. It's spencertassone.com. I also post, the stuff that I'm working on LinkedIn. So you can find me there. And yeah, if anybody's interested in the research that I do, feel free to send me an email. Again, you can find that on my website or in the show notes. But yeah, I would tell folks to reach out if they have an interest in things related to heat waves or anything related to rivers.
Very cool.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks for joining us. We'll have to have you back in the future to talk about your new projects with the new job. So good luck with that. And thanks again for joining.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me.
That's our show. Thank you, Spencer, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Bye.
See you, everybody.